Welcome everyone, my name is Laura and this is Aeroclass Expert Talks. If we were to play a word association game and I said airports, I'm sure someone would follow with tourism, and of course they would be absolutely right because tourism and air travel are interlinked. Tourism is not only relevant to those hungry for adventure or eager to see some historical sites. It is a very important piece in airport and airline business strategies because tourism is a driving factor for and a stimulator of change in air transport. But if you are doubting my words, I've got some backup today. I have a professor of aviation, Aeroclass instructor, and a consultant for aviation and tourism, Gavin Eccles. So Gavin, I'm very glad to have you join me for this talk.
Thank you, Laura. Excited as well. Look forward to giving my opinions and insights.
So, following the pattern of our previous expert talks, we will explore Gavin's experience in aviation and teaching, talk about his course at Aeroclass, and look into air system development in a bit more detail. So I'm going to start, Gavin, with the same question that I ask all my guests, just because I think it's the most important one as well. How did your career in aviation start?
Oh, it's a long time ago, but let me try and go back. I was doing my doctoral thesis actually in hotels. So I started in the hotel sector. I was looking at branding, and I was trying to understand the role of a brand in the hotel sector. And within that, I was contacted by the consultants that were doing work for the hotel group. It was the biggest hotel group in the UK at the time. And these were guys that had been inspirational in British Airways in the 80s in turning around the company, and then they created a consultancy that focused on services management, and hence they were working for the hotel group. And cut a long story short, they said, why don't you come and work for us? And they put me straight into BA, and I went into British Airways as an internal consultant to basically run all of their sales and marketing development programs. So yeah, that's how I got in, right in early, and right in at what was then the world's favorite airline. Maybe things have moved on in 30 odd years, but yeah, that's how I got in through hotels and then hotels. And there used to be a good link between hotels and airlines. That kind of slipped recently. And as you said in your introduction, when you mention airports, you normally also think of airlines. And it used to be airlines and hotels. Now it's more airlines and tourism. Hotels kind of have not been so well connected with the aviation world. Now that's for another day. So that was it, basically, yeah. So, and then from that, I did that for some years, and then consultancy, and then working for airlines full time. So yeah, that was about 30 years ago.
What do you remember? Yeah, sorry. What do you remember from your days at British Airways? Because as you said, it was some time ago now, and I'm sure a lot of things changed. So were airlines operating a bit differently then? Were they looking into different things?
For sure. I mean, in those days, you really didn't have the Middle East presence. I remember going to Dubai, and the Sheikh Zayed Road had 3 hotels. And Emirates didn't really exist. So the likes of BA, Air France, these were the flag carriers. And in those days, BA, yes, it was a leader. They developed a project which was to put people lying flat in business class, and that was something that nobody had ever done before. And so, yeah, there was inspiration coming out of the company. And of course, the Middle East carriers then arrived and kind of changed the game a little bit. But yeah, in those days, they really were flying around the world, offices all over. And it was great to be part of that. And we teamed up with London Business School, and we put on this program of creating what we call Searching for the Edge, which was about giving sales and marketing people in the airline vision, and then working with Tesco's, which was the supermarket group that was strong in loyalty management, and started to understand that the customer experience that you see in supermarkets and how they look after their customers, and what airlines can benefit from this. And in those days, relationship marketing was really just starting. and supermarkets had kind of led the way in loyalty programs, and airlines were some way behind that. So yeah, it was good days, really good days. And of course, the airline, like a lot, had major changes and maybe was too big, like a lot of companies became, not easy to change. And good luck to them. They're still a very strong brand when you look at the aviation sector.
Absolutely. But now you started your career in BA, and then you moved on to other assignments. So I'm guessing, you never really looked back, and regretted your decision to join aviation as an industry.
No, for sure. And, the last 18 months, not being able to travel, for somebody that was traveling so much, it's a strange feeling to be home. A lot of people say that, when you've worked for an airline, it's hard to go and do anything else, and because you're so used to that travel buzz. And I remember, one of the first things I learned in the airline was that, how to, the people that work in aviation, tourism, anything in hospitality, just the importance of the kind of the work that you do and the way that you bring people together. And I remember, if you worked for one of these wonderful marketing companies like Procter & Gamble or Unilever, yes, they make wonderful products that help our lives, but there's nothing, you go to an airport on a Friday afternoon and see people's reactions, and then you say, if that can't motivate you to work for an airline. I remember, we used to show pictures of people hugging and crying in an airport on the courses and send that to people and say, that's the industry that you work for. Go and work for a company that makes toothpaste, and see the difference in relation to, but saying that, how those wonderful marketing companies have created differentiation. And some people say the aviation world became too commoditized. We should have learned more from the likes of how P&G and Unilever have really taken brand expectations. What the aviation industry kind of lost itself a little bit, and everybody was focusing on lowest price.
Right, so now we kind of moved to this a bit more challenging direction. So I do want to ask you, you've moved, as you said, you've traveled a lot, you moved to other countries for your assignments. But do you remember what is the most challenging or something that just kind of stuck in your mind from your assignment, or a project that you found really interesting?
I suppose I have gone two. On the most challenging probably was that joining the airline, joining BA, and particularly training sales and marketing. We ran a course in some unbelievable kind of looked like some sort of British stately home in US, which it's strange to see that when you think of skyscrapers, etc. But we had all of the US BA sales and marketing team, and you got to go and teach Americans about marketing. Didn't they invent it? That was, I was young, mid-20s, going over to a completely different world, and during my thesis, I'd studied all of these great American business gurus, and then you have to go and teach Americans that they created the story. So I suppose the most interesting probably was being, and linking then to what you've said about my role in air services, to actually get a flight from China to Portugal. It took a year and maybe 15 visits to Beijing to convince Group Hainan that it would make sense to start flying to Lisbon. This was when China, back in 2016, 15, when China really was, everybody was chasing the Chinese. And to go there and represent the country and try and bring a flight. Every European country was really trying to find Chinese airline companies to fly. They have a very strict rule as well, which was if you have a flight already by one of the big three Chinese companies, then you aren't allowed to travel. And so, yeah, we were kind of pushing for Hainan. We started with Air China, then we ended up with Hainan Group. But that was, that when that plane arrived, that was kind of a little bit of, that took a lot, lost in translation, as you can imagine when you're working in a market like that. But also it was a booming time to be in China and just see how things, and what they were doing in aviation. And of course, they're the ones that are probably coming out of this crisis the last in relation to opening their borders, and that's something that a lot of European cities have lost that Chinese tourist in the last couple of years.
And talking about other challenges, especially in your professional career, you took upon teaching as well. So I want to know, what do you remember from your very first teaching experience? Was it something that you expected to, enjoy, or did it just kind of happen and then you continued? What's the story there?
I was at the University of Bournemouth, so I was doing the PhD. So in those days we were called a research assistant. So we had to give classes. So I remember, we're talking now, 22-year-old going into a classroom to basically teach what would have been 18-year-olds, because they that's in the UK your degree is from 18 to 21, and then you start doing your masters and doctorate straight away as well. So yes, I mean, preparation needed, but I suppose, and also just the joy of telling others something that we know, and the interaction. And I think what I learned quickly was that the best way to teach is to facilitate. It isn't about telling; it's about listening and sharing, and that's been pretty much what I've done since. I always say I'm a facilitator, not a teacher. It's a nicer way of thinking. It's a way that we need to listen and share with each other. And of course, the further you go up the academic career, the more you can facilitate. People say the wonders of doing MBAs, etc., is because the power of the participants is in some cases more knowledgeable than the professor, and it's about sharing that ideas across with each other. But I think, what I learned quickly was, don't just believe that you know it all. Be ready to listen and discuss and hopefully share ideas for the best of everybody. You learn as much from them as they learn from you.
Absolutely, yeah. And you began your teaching experience in lecture halls, not online. And you're now teaching at a university in Portugal. So I just wanted to know, because now you've moved to e-learning here with Aeroclass. So how is it different from teaching someone on campus? Is it more like, do you feel more pressure when you see students in front of you, or when you just kind of stand in front of a camera?
I think, obviously, picking up what I just said, the benefit of having the students in the room is that there's dialogue straight away. So even, yes, you would hope that people ask questions. If they don't, you can try to raise discussion points that brings the group in. So yes, the way that we teach in the real, let's call it the real world for the moment, is it's dialogue and engagement. Obviously in the pandemic, we had to change, and of course universities had to go online, and for a lot of professors that was not easy, because they're not familiar with the way that you need to also present the work. You can't just put slide after slide after slide. It will destroy the mind, and people need to think differently about how they work in an online. And I don't think everybody's been able to make that transition as quickly as they would have liked to. But I think what it's done, it's shown that there's an alternative way to learn. And I think, a lot of universities, training companies, people taking days out of diaries was complicated. Now, obviously, during the pandemic, it was a little bit easier to get to people because we knew they were at home. But I think what e-learning is proving is that it allows people to study in a different way, rather than forcing people to attend, be it morning or afternoons or evenings. And obviously, a lot of my work was more at master's level, so it was normally evenings and weekends, which puts stress on people. Coming from work at 6:30 to then take 4-hour classes and finishing at 10:30 at night, that's not good for the system. People are not fresh. So I think, yes, universities in some cases also have to change their way of thinking, and this campus mentality is the wrong way. You have to go out to the market, not expect the market comes to your classroom. So I think, yes, what you're doing over in Aeroclass makes complete sense, because it allows people to have access to learning at their own pace, at their own time. And that's where universities have not been so keen to move. We have classrooms, we have teachers, this is a timetable, so fit around us or, you can't come. And that has to change. So I think, yes, what you're doing, it's perfect to allow people access to information and learning in a completely different way. It's not better or worse, both have their pros and cons. It's a different opportunity. And we should use that and pick that up and help people to learn in a different thinking.
Well, Gavin, you were a student once as well. Do you imagine yourself now being a student and learning stuff on your kind of computer screen? Do you think you would have enjoyed that as well?
I think it's a blend, and I think one of the great things is how to use both. I suppose in all cases we become so familiar with how we find content through the internet, so that is a way. I think what people would say is that doing courses in isolation of meeting, do you lose some of that sharing of ideas and sharing of best practice? So the blended approach, I think, is the best way forward. So I know that's something that you are studying a lot, to understand how to take tutored content online, at the same time also try and provide platforms that bring the participants somewhat together to share ideas. And I think, that's got to be the way forward. This kind of blended approach. It shouldn't just be classroom, or it shouldn't just be a computer. The way that we can put both together is the way forward. And I think it allows people to reach out for new content and share content in a much easier way, and support that and make it more practical as well. And I think that's where Aeroclass, where you've been able to find that niche, is go very much more practical driven and move it away from the board, the kind of the classroom style where it's providing more theoretical underpinning. No, let's go for the more practical, applied approach, which is what industries needs.
Well, let's now talk about your course at Aeroclass. I'm sure our viewers want to know more about that, what it involves, what to expect, and who would benefit from it the most.
Yeah, what we came up with was basically a course which brings airlines, airports, and tourism boards to the same classroom. Let's call it classroom. And we're calling it Air Services and Tourism Development. Air Services is something that airlines and airports have been doing for many years. And what we're really saying here is, how does an airport connect with an airline, or how does an airline engage and ensure that it can land in an airport? That's the kind of mentality. But what we're trying to do is move that to another level and basically say the future of tourism is through connectivity, and the way to get airlines engaged with your destination is to upskill the people who work in tourism boards to understand how airlines think. If I know how an airline thinks about creating a route, I then, a tourism board, can actually start liaising better with my airport on how we can work together to talk to that airline. So in previous times, it was very much airline and airport negotiated, and let's see if tourism has some money to try to support some sort of marketing campaign. What we're trying to do with this Aeroclass program is basically, through a series of modules, we have around five different modules that can be done together or done over different periods of people's time. It's basically to understand, what is air services pre-pandemic and what will happen after the pandemic, and try and give people understandings of how do tourism and airports really start engaging. And then we go into more specifics, how airlines think. Put yourself in the shoes of an airline. Why would I fly to your destination? What risk do I have, and how can you help reduce that risk? And I suppose this is where I'm a little bit lucky, because I've been on both sides of the table. I've worked for an airline, so I've negotiated discussions with airports, and I'm also advisor to tourism boards. So I know what we are allowed to incentivize through funds, etc. So I suppose I bring to the class the bits that one hasn't had of the other. and I'll share those ideas with people. And then we look at how you put together incentive programs. And then we kind of conclude with, so how much is a route worth? So if we are able to get better connectivity to our destination, what can we expect then in terms of the multiplier effect and linking connectivity and tourism together? So that's a little bit about what we offer. Who can be there? Who should this be pitched at? Well, it's mainly to talk to tourism board teams, so those people who are working in the liaison with source market development, so those people who are looking at strategic vision for the tourism board, where we're going, which markets do we want to attract, those that are already liaising with the airport team. Then the airports themselves, what we call the airport marketing teams, the people who are working closely with the airlines. Now they need to understand how to work and engage with the airport teams. Civil aviation authorities, so the people who are kind of those who are responsible for managing aviation in the countries, for them to understand, how airlines and airports and tourism are working together. Chambers of commerce, we've seen certainly around Europe, chambers of commerce are actively engaging with incentives to talk to airlines because they're interested in connectivity to their destination. Economic agencies, DMOs, destination management companies, etc. Those are the audience that would be beneficial to this Air Services and Tourism Development Program.
Thanks, Gavin. I think it's a great introduction, and for everyone who's interested, they can watch Gavin's course at aeroclass.org. But if you're not hooked yet, I've got some questions that might get you more interested, because I had an opportunity to watch this course. And I kind of came up with a few questions that I want to ask Gavin and just kind of explore it a bit more. And in your course, Gavin, you talk about air service development and the three players that play that game: airports, airlines, and tourism boards. But which one is mostly overlooked or, let's say, underappreciated?
I suppose it would be, if we look back, it would be tourism boards, because tourism boards were normally, the role of a tourism board is to create destination awareness, create the brand, create the image, and build the ecosystem that when a tourist arrives, this is what they can do. So, of course, they're not experts in aviation, they're not experts in airports. And I think so, from that, saying that, what that then meant is that a lot of negotiations about routes were not with tourism, they were with airlines and airports. I think what we would try and now say is that as tourism is rebuilding post the pandemic, what's important is to understand which source markets was a destination interested in 2019, and which source markets now could be opportunities in 22. Because the world changed, the airline system is changing, the kind of models of aviation is changing. So I think if tourism boards are now rethinking their vision of 22 to 25 in terms of, we hadn't gone for this market, let's look at this particular source market, then they need to understand the air link that could come from that market. Who are the players? What's going on in that source market with aviation? So I think this is what the course will start to do. It will bring tourism people to understand a little bit about aviation, and then allow tourism and the airports to be more engaged together, to be able to go and talk to airlines. So in the past it was airlines and airports. Now what we try and understand, it's airports and tourism going back to talk to airlines. Some people would say, an airline doesn't fly because of an airport. The airport is just a means of arrival. Now the question is what they're looking for is tourism as one side of that story, commercial benefits in terms of what's happening with business, and obviously friends and relatives, and if there's that little bit of travel as well. So tourism is let's call 1/3, the other of potential segmentation. The other 2/3 is VFR, visiting friends and relatives, and business travel. So business travel, tourism, and VFR, which makes up the airline's seat dimensions. So 1/3 of that, tourism boards were not so involved, and they should be much more involved. And that's why we really pitched this course, to try to upskill those people to then have that right conversation. Not to say they need to do the job of the airport. No, the airport still makes all of the connections with the airlines, but brings dialogue closer to each other. So I would say yes, answering the question, tourism had been a little bit left behind, and now it's the opportunity for tourism to take the lead.
And to talk about this, you mentioned that the world has changed, and of course that's all due to the pandemic. But there must have been some, unexpected changes, let's say in domestic travel as well. Let's say in the United States, the international borders were closed, and the domestic flights kind of took over. And were there any changes that were surprising? I guess some of the airports that usually are not that busy became very busy because people started traveling, within their country.
I would say also across Europe as well, with what Ryanair, EasyJet and Wizz. We came up with there's a new buzzword, it's called route experimentation. And this was not how airlines were very logical, very, very disciplined in planning. We have what we call the IATA winter, which is 7 months, and the IATA summer, which is 7 months, and the IATA winter, which is 5 months. So November, March, April into October. And airlines would be planning. So now we're here in November, so we're in IATA winter. Normally we'll be planning now next winter. In some cases, airlines have not yet finished completely this winter, because planes could be available. Summer 22 is still not yet programmed by all airlines. So this is unprecedented. But this is also, in some cases, in the past we were very logical. So we've planned winter 22 now. So sorry, it's done. Everything's in the schedule. Airlines are selling tickets. Slots have been negotiated, etc. And it's been very disciplined. But maybe that's not how the consumer trends were changing. And this idea of people's habits being more spontaneous. So what the pandemic did, and what you're right, talk mainly about the US, because they opened aviation faster than anybody else because of the domestic push. Routes were being planned within 15 days rather than 1 year. So all of a sudden, as long as we can get the pilots and the crew up and running, and there's a slot at the airport, we can move things around very quickly. So I think what this has shown is that why post-pandemic would we go back to planning 1 year ahead? Surely we should be more experimental during the periods of the season. So yes, now we're here in November. If a trend picks up for February, we should be ready for that. Don't put your assets just and commit to them because it's what we've always done. And I think what this has shown, coming back to your earlier question, who airports, airlines, tourism, who's now probably got control is airlines. They are more flexible than they've ever been. So if they're ready to change, it means airports and so tourism needs to be looking at information 3 to 4 months in advance. And there are providers of that data which will give you forward bookings very quickly. And if you're seeing demand coming let's say in February, talk to the airlines and then say, look, we're seeing forward bookings. Switch some capacity from one destination to another, rather than what we would never have done that. No, everything's planned. I think what this has shown is that airlines can be very spontaneous. Tourism can be spontaneous as well. Do the airports have the infrastructure ready to do quick change? And that's something that we need to think about, because don't plan for next year, plan for the next few months. And with the way social is changing, the way people book travel as well, that also allows airlines to then work with quick schedules and try and build up a new way of looking at route development.
Do you think this change is going to stay around, or is it something that only applies to this kind of pandemic situation?
It's hard to say, because you hope that people don't go back to what they knew in the past. 2019, yes, capacity-wise, and growth-wise, things were very well. But commercially, a lot of airlines were not as profitable as maybe some of their shareholders would have liked. So, we were not, one thing is growth, one thing is capacity, but demand also is important, and yield management and the importance of what we can get per seat. So I think flexibility has to be around. I think what airlines are learning is that why be so strict in planning? If the trends are, if the trends continue as they are, let's work with this and be adaptive and create more experiments. And for that, you need tourism boards understanding the role of an airline, and airports being ready with incentives together with tourism to not have such long processes that we've done in the past to get things up and running. We need to be more flexible.
So what are the other challenges that air system development as a thing is facing now post-COVID? Because when you mentioned the supply is coming back, but the demand is still not at the 100%. So what are the challenges, and how should these three players overcome them?
Well, I think obviously from destinations it's an opportunity. In one way, if one destination is not doing so well and another one is, you can switch people's habits, and we saw that certainly in 2021. There was a lot of switching of one destination to another. So I suppose at some point, it is a little bit of a fight, whilst we still don't know what is happening now. We're here in November. We're starting to see some concerns in Central Europe. If airlines were planning a lot of travel to the Christmas markets, what will happen with the ski destinations if they're not going to open? Would they put flights now to Southern Europe that were going to winter holiday destinations? So, we're not through this yet. So I think the first challenge is being ready to liaise from a tourism's point of view, being ready to put your business case forward quickly to airlines, that if somebody else can't get what they expected, are we ready? And that, of course, it's somebody's loss is somebody's gain. It's not always a nice way to think about it, but I think that it's inevitable that there are some markets that will be more open this winter and maybe spring than maybe others. So there's a little bit of opportunistic business there if we work that way. At some point, everybody should get back to some reality. What that then means is that how do we look at where we've come from? And there are opportunities now to look at new source markets. Aviation is changing in certain destinations, and some airlines have got bigger, some airlines have got smaller. So again, it depending on where were you facing your market space? Were you working with which carriers? How are they looking? So you need to kind of do your due diligence. Where were we? Where will we be? Is the airline situation well in those markets? And how can we benefit from that? So I think at this stage, we still can't say we've got through this pandemic. I think we probably were more optimistic in October, and we probably now might have a little bit of less optimistic in November, unfortunately, just because of where we are in certain, and also the way people are talking about maybe some further lockdowns, etc. It's the wrong terminology. Lockdowns, it means not traveling, so it's a little bit of a worry. It may be short, but again, we were just getting some optimism back, and we need to keep that positivity as much as we can, obviously in the realities in what we're facing.
Well, I guess time will tell us how, what happens. But while we wait, I invite everyone to watch Gavin's course and learn more about this. And maybe, it will prove worth your time. And then you can use your knowledge to further, expand your tourism in your country, your city, or wherever you work. Anyway, Gavin, thanks for joining me. I really appreciate your time and you sharing your knowledge with us and your thoughts.
Laura, it was a pleasure. Thank you very much. And yes, I look forward to having the opportunity to talk further and present the Aeroclass project to the market.
Sure thing. Thanks everyone for watching, and I'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.